Adeze Nwosu was 38 years old the morning her ex-husband walked uninvited into the garden of the estate where she was about to be married and told the assembled guests that he deserved a share of everything she had built. He said it loudly. He said it with the particular confidence of a man who has spent years constructing a version of events in which he is owed something, and who has finally located a room large enough to say so. He was dressed well. He had rehearsed. He had timed his entrance for the moment when the ceremony was about to begin, because he understood that a crowd was a kind of leverage, and he had always preferred leverage to merit. What he had not done, not once in the 4 years since the divorce was finalized, was ask a single question about the legal structure of the company Adeze had incorporated 3 years before she ever agreed to have dinner with him. He had believed, the way he had always believed things about her, on the basis of what he could see. He could see a modest apartment and a second-hand car, and a woman who packed her own lunch and worked long hours at what she described as a consulting firm. He had never asked what the firm consulted on. He had never asked whose names were on the accounts. He had never asked why, even in the leanest months of their marriage, she had never once asked him for money. By the time he stood in that garden, the firm he had never asked about had cleared $500 million in cumulative contracts across 11 years. He had no legal claim to a single dollar of it. What he came to that wedding expecting was an audience. What he found was something else entirely. Before we jump into the story, comment where in the world you are watching from and subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you need to hear. The early light on the morning of an Atlanta day in September came in soft and low. The kind of light that arrived without insisting on itself. And Adeze had always found it the most honest light of any hour. She was in the kitchen of the house she had renovated over 2 years, standing at the island she had designed herself. A wide slab of honed black granite set into a base she had built from reclaimed heart pine, the grain running the length of the counter in long, quiet lines. She had sourced the wood herself. She had laid the stone herself, with help from a mason she trusted, over a long weekend in March of the prior year. She was making tea, not coffee. Her grandmother had always said that coffee was a decision and tea was a consideration, and that the kind of thinking required before a large day needed the slower of the two. Adeze had kept that, along with most of what her grandmother had given her. Josephine Nwosu had come to the United States from Enugu in 1971 with 2 suitcases, and the kind of practical intelligence that did not require a formal category to be effective. She had built a cleaning business in Atlanta that grew, over 20 years, into a commercial property services firm with 43 employees. And she had done it without anyone fully noticing until the noticing was no longer optional. She had told Adeze, when Adeze was 15 and beginning to understand that women in their family operated at a different register than the world expected, that the secret was not ambition. The secret was patience dressed in ordinary clothing. Let them think you are small, her grandmother had said. Small things get underestimated. Underestimated things get overlooked. Overlooked things get built. Adeze had built. She had incorporated her urban logistics consulting firm at 26, 2 years after finishing her MBA, and 1 year after completing a second, quieter certification in supply chain infrastructure that most people she knew did not know existed. The firm worked with municipal governments and large commercial developers on the logistics of construction in dense urban environments. How to move materials through a city without closing it. How to sequence deliveries across a project with 100 moving parts. How to design the invisible architecture of a build so that the visible architecture could arrive on schedule. It was unglamorous, highly technical, and extraordinarily in demand. And she had grown it without spectacle for 3 years before she met Raymond Cole at a civic leadership event in Buckhead. Raymond was a commercial real estate broker, charming and well-connected and entirely comfortable in the rooms where Atlanta business got done. He had found her across a reception and asked about her work with the specific energy of a man who wanted to seem interested more than he was. And she had answered him simply and watched him nod without fully following. And she had thought, not unkindly, that this was the kind of man who moved through a room collecting impressions rather than information. She had married him 2 years later, during a period of her life when she had confused warmth for depth, which was not a mistake she repeated. The marriage lasted 3 years. It ended without violence and without drama, in the office of a mediator in Midtown Atlanta, with a settlement that was clean precisely because Adese's attorney had spent the months before the filing ensuring that every asset, account, and contractual instrument related to the firm was documented as having predated the marriage and remained uncommingled throughout. Raymond had signed the agreement without fully reading it, because he had never fully read anything that did not directly concern him, and what concerned him at the time was a woman named Tanya who worked in his office and who had been his primary interest for the better part of the marriage's final year. He had left. He had moved on. He had assumed Adise had done the same. The invitation had gone to him by mistake. That was the part that took Adise the longest to fully confirm, because she was not a woman who accepted the word mistake before she had ruled out the word deliberate. Her assistant had sent the guest list to the venue coordinator, and somewhere in that transfer, Raymond Cole's name and address had remained on a draft list from a previous event and been included in the outgoing mailing. He received a formal invitation to her wedding in Buckhead at an estate she used for client events, which he knew about because she had held a professional reception there 2 years prior that he had attended as her then-husband. He had not called to clarify. He had not written back to decline. He had come. And he had come with a plan. Adese did not learn any of this until the morning of the wedding, when her coordinator, a woman named Grace who had been managing her events for 4 years and who had the specific composure of someone who had seen every kind of disruption and found none of them unsolvable, knocked on the door of the preparation room and said, in the level voice she reserved for information that required immediate processing, "Raymond is in the garden." Adese set down her tea. He's speaking to the guests. She did not react in the way that a different woman might have reacted. She did not stand and move toward the door. She sat where she was, at the dressing table with the quiet light coming in from the east window, and she thought for exactly 30 seconds. Then she picked up her phone. She called her attorney first. Brenda Cole, no relation to Raymond, a fact Adise had found quietly amusing for years, was a corporate and family law attorney who had been the legal architect of Adise's firm since its 2nd year of operation. She had structured the original incorporation, the shareholder agreements, the client contracts, and the divorce settlement. She knew the complete financial picture of Adise's professional life in the way that only a trusted attorney knows a client's affairs, precisely, completely, and with a file for every contingency. She answered on the 2nd ring. "Raymond is at the venue," Adise said. A brief silence. "In what capacity?" "Making claims to the guests." Another silence, shorter. "I am 40 minutes away. Do not engage him directly. Do not let anyone engage him on your behalf who is not me." Understood. The 2nd call was to her uncle, Leonard Nwosu, who was 67 years old and had been a corporate attorney himself for 35 years before retiring, and who had flown in from Houston for the wedding and was at that moment. She knew, having breakfast in the venue's east parlor. He answered immediately. "Raymond Cole is in the garden," she said. A pause. "I see. Brenda is on her way. I'll go to the garden," Leonard said. Not as a question. As a statement of what was about to happen. Don't engage. "I won't engage," he said. "I'll simply be present. There is a difference." She trusted that distinction because she had learned it from watching him operate for her entire adult life. She set the phone down and looked at her reflection in the dressing table mirror for a moment. She was in her wedding clothes. Her hair was done. The morning was exactly as she had planned it to be. And Raymond Cole was in the garden. And she had spent 12 years building a firm that could withstand more than one uninvited guest. She picked up her tea. She waited for Brenda. In the garden, Leonard Nwosu had positioned himself at the edge of the assembled guests with the quiet authority of a man who had spent decades in rooms where authority was exercised without volume. He did not say anything to Raymond. He simply stood where he was and watched. In the way that experienced attorneys watch things, not with reaction, but with attention, because attention was what was required. Raymond had been speaking for 11 minutes by the time Brenda arrived. She came through the garden gate in the particular way she moved when she was working, directly, without hurry, with the complete composure of someone who had never needed speed to achieve precision. She stood at the center of the garden where the guests could see her, and she waited for Raymond to pause. And when he did, she said, in a voice that was entirely calm and entirely audible, "Mr. Cole, I'm Brenda Cole, Miss Nwosu's attorney. May I have a moment?" It was not a question. Raymond looked at her. He had the expression of a man who had prepared for an audience and found instead a process. They moved to the side of the garden, just beyond the nearest row of chairs, with Leonard 2 steps behind and the guests arranged in front of them with the particular stillness of people who understood they were witnessing something real. Brenda opened the portfolio she carried. She did not present all of it. She presented what was needed. The certificate of incorporation for the firm, dated 3 years before Raymond Cole had attended the Buckhead civic event. The original shareholder agreement, Adaeze Nwosu, sole shareholder. The financial disclosure from the divorce settlement, signed by Raymond Cole's own attorney, confirming that Raymond had reviewed and accepted the terms establishing that the firm was a premarital asset in which he held no ownership interest. His signature, dated, notarized, on the line that read, "I acknowledge that I have no present or future claim to the assets, revenues, or equity of Nwosu Logistics Consulting, LLC." He had signed it. He had not read it first. Brenda did not say this. She did not need to. The document said it in language that required no translation. Raymond looked at the papers. His expression moved through several rooms, and none of them were comfortable. He tried. He said the settlement had been presented to him under circumstances that did not allow for full review, which was not true. He said the assets of the firm had grown substantially during the marriage, and that marital effort had contributed to that growth, which was legally irrelevant given the shareholder structure and the documentation of premarital incorporation. He said that regardless of the paperwork, a man who had given years of his life to a woman deserved to be treated with a certain consideration, and that if Adaeze would simply come out and speak with him, he believed they could arrive at something fair. Leonard Nwosu said, from 2 steps behind Brenda, without looking at Raymond, "She built it before you arrived. She built it while you were there. She has been building it since you left. Your presence in each of those periods was the only variable." He paused. "The math does not favor your position." Raymond was quiet for a moment. Then Brenda said, "You are welcome to remain as a guest. If you make any further public claim against Miss Nwosu or her firm, I will begin the process of filing a harassment injunction before the afternoon is out. That process is already prepared." She closed the portfolio. The ceremony begins in 30 minutes. Adaeze came into the garden 12 minutes later. She did not look at Raymond, not because she was avoiding him, but because he was no longer the point. The point was the morning, and the man waiting for her at the end of the garden path, and the guests who had come because they mattered to her, and the grandmother who was seated in the front row with her hands folded in her lap and her eyes already bright. She walked through the garden the way she had always moved through the work she cared about, with intention, without display, with the quiet certainty of a woman who had built something real and knew exactly what she was walking toward. The ceremony was 22 minutes long. Raymond left before it was finished. 20 months later, the morning light came through the tall windows of the new office on the 14th floor of a building in Midtown Atlanta, and Adize sat at the desk she had brought from the first office. The one she had worked from for 9 years before the firm's growth made the space insufficient, because some things you carried forward not out of sentiment, but because they had been present at the beginning and deserved to be present at the next thing too. The firm had passed $500 million in cumulative contract value the prior spring, quietly, without a press release, because Adize had never measured success by who knew about it. There were 11 people on staff now, 4 of them women she had recruited specifically from engineering programs at HBCUs, and she ran a monthly office hours session for young women in logistics and supply chain that had grown in its second year to draw participants from 3 states. A man named David had been her husband for 18 months. He was a civil engineer who worked in municipal infrastructure and who had, in their first year together, read 3 books about supply chain logistics because he wanted to understand what she did and found, to his own apparent surprise, that he found it genuinely interesting. He did not perform curiosity. He came to the office sometimes on Friday afternoons and sat in the chair by the east window and read while she finished what needed finishing. And he did not require managing. She heard about Raymond the way she heard things she was no longer tracking directly, through a professional contact who mentioned it in passing, without particular emphasis, because it was not particularly remarkable. His firm had not recovered from a contract dispute that had surfaced the year prior. He had relocated out of Atlanta. Tanya had moved on some time before that. His name came up occasionally in the circles that remembered him and then did not come up, because the circles had moved on too, which was what circles did. Adize received the information. She noted it. She returned to the project proposal open on her desk. Her grandmother was well. She was 81 and had opinions about the new office's color choices that Adize had incorporated into the final selections, because Josephine Nwosu had earned the right to have her opinions matter, and Adize had always known it. She was at the desk on a Thursday morning, the city coming up below her in the particular way of a city that had been building itself for a long time and intended to continue, when her assistant brought in a coffee and set it down and said there was a call from the Houston office when she was ready. She was ready. She looked out the window for a moment before she picked up the phone. The light was good. The morning was clear. The firm was solvent and growing and entirely hers, and the structure beneath it was as sound as anything she had ever built, because she had laid every piece herself, the way her grandmother had taught her to lay things, quietly, patiently, in ordinary clothing, one course at a time, until the thing was too solid for anyone to question what it was. "Let them think you are small," her grandmother had said. She had been small once. She had let them think so. The rest had been inevitable. I hope you enjoyed that one. Be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I've picked out 2 more for you that I think you'll really like.